Welcome back to the Movie Man. Today I will show you a 2022 Indian drama thriller film, Runway 34. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The movie starts with Vikrant Khanna, a professional pilot who is famous for his heroic action of taking an emergency landing on his flight. That day he just arrived in Dubai and was about to head to his hotel. On his way to the hotel, one of his friends called him and invited him to a club. Initially he refused the invitation because he knew that he had a flight the next day, but since his friend continuously forced him to come, he finally agreed and went to the club. There he saw his man secretly admiring a woman. His friend dared him to get her phone number in exchange for a car. Vikrant confidently replied that he would do the challenge effortlessly. Surprisingly, he managed to get to know the woman Anjali and invited her for a chat with him and his friend. They then spent the night partying until the morning. When he returned to the hotel, the Vikrant used his time to sleep all day, but despite taking a long nap he almost didn't make it to his flight. If only he didn't hear his wife's calls because his alarm failed to wake him up. As soon as he woke up he changed his clothes and rushed to the airport. He also used his sunglasses to hide his eyes. The moment he arrived at the airport he went to meet his co-pilot named Tanya Albuquerque and had a briefing about his incoming flights. While Tanya read the details so carefully, the Vikrant on the other hand only read a glimpse of it and puts back the document. Tanya judged Vikrant for his ignorance and told him that he had to take the details seriously. The Vikrant then proves that he had managed to remember all the details by conveying the contents of the first page. Tanya was surprised that he was able to memorize the details that fast. Without any further ado, both of them entered the plane. Before they took off, the officials checked the vitals of the plane. The Vikrant greeted the passengers and explained the details of the flight, including the destination, distance and weather conditions. When the plane had reached the altitude, Vikrant immediately turned on the autopilot and took his time to sleep for a while. He asked his co-pilot to stay awake and watched for everything during his nap. Looking at his condition, Tanya asked if he was okay. He just replied that he wanted to go home because the next day was her daughter's birthday. After a few minutes, Vikrant was woken up by the sound of the engine alarm that kept beeping because Tanya couldn't find the problem. The Vikrant opened his eyes and solved everything quickly. Vikrant then called one of the flight attendants and told her to bring him a cup of black coffee and a slice of cake. Before she left, Vikrant whispered the name of the medicine, which is Dispirin, a type of aspirin. When the flight attendant returned, Vikrant immediately took his coffee and went to the toilet. A moment later he returned to his pilot's seat and asked Tanya if something happened when he wasn't there. Tanya replied with nothing and they had a small talk. After that, during the flight the rain started pouring down heavily, followed by lightning and thunder. Vikrant asked Tanya for the plane details. Tanya replied that the plane still had 4,800 kilograms of fuel and would take around 45 minutes before they arrived in Kochi. At the same time, one of the staff of the air traffic control or ATC in Kochi was seen forcing himself to work despite his health condition. Tanya contacted Kochi's ATC for permission to land and the ATC granted that. Some moments later, Tanya once again asked the ATC in Kochi about the weather condition on the runway and whether they were safe to land or not. The ATC then confirmed that the visibility on the runway was low due to heavy rain and landing was not permitted. Tanya asked Vikrant whether to continue the flight or to approach the landing runway because they were low on fuel. The Vikrant replied to continue to land despite the low visibility. After informing them about their low fuel to the ATC permitted them to land on runway number 27, but after a slight descent they lost contact with the ATC and had to turn around. Not long after, the ATC and Kochi notified that one plane had successfully landed in Thiruvananthapuram since the weather there was clear. Hearing the information, Tanya suggested Vikrant land the plane in Bengaluru since it was one of the alternative landing options. She also mentioned that the fuel needed to reach Bengaluru was 3,300 kilograms, while the current fuel level was still 3,900 kilograms. Tanya said that it would be safer to land there and they turned around to Bengaluru. Vikrant then ordered Tanya to confirm the weather condition in Thiruvananthapuram. After that she accepted Vikrant's decision to rearrange the flight to Thiruvananthapuram since they would save more fuel if they landed there. Vikrant told her that her feeling wouldn't be accurate at this height and that if they opted for Tanya's suggestions it might be risky. On the other place, the people who were waiting for their families and coaches started to get worried when they found out that the flight status of Skyline 777 was changed. The plane passenger at the same time also protested the inconvenience. Vikrant then informed the ATC in Kochi to retry their landing there. The ATC permitted them to land on runway number 27. Their crazy decision to land on Kochi despite the bad weather was questioned by the ATC. When they got closer to the landing ground, the Vikrant and Tanya couldn't see anything because the weather was so bad and the vision was low. At that moment, Vikrant decided to rearrange the landing to Thiruvananthapuram. At the same time, the ATC Thiruvananthapuram was busy informing another ATC from another airport to decline any flight to Thiruvananthapuram because of bad weather and a storm heading there. Unfortunately, the officer in charge at Kochi ATC had been replaced by another staff. Moreover, the 6 staff that received the information brought the paper containing the emergency information that should have been notified to Skyline 777. One passenger on that plane who was a journalist realized the plane destination had been rearranged. On the other hand, Vikrant also notified the passengers that the plane schedule would be delayed due to the change of destination to Thiruvananthapuram. The journalists realized something was off on that flight. He mentioned that if humans and the weather made mistakes at the same time, it would be the start of the disaster. That word started a panic attack among the passengers and the flight attendants couldn't control it much longer. Vikrant took control and spoke directly to the passengers. He said to work on the problem together because after all they just wanted to reach their destination. Meanwhile, the Thiruvananthapuram ATC staff seemed to be relaxed since no flight would be coming to the airport at that moment. Shockingly, the wind direction started changing irregularly. Even more, they were shocked when they received a flight landing permit from Tanya. They wondered if the Skyline 777 didn't receive the storm emergency notification from Kochi and ATC. They informed her that the visibility level in Thiruvananthapuram was almost zero and aircraft landing would be impossible. They suggested they land the aircraft in Bengaluru instead. Vikrant there replied that they didn't get any notice about the storm and their fuel level was minimum and wouldn't possibly be able to reach Bengaluru. Hearing that, Tanya started panicking and cried, but Vikrant told her to keep calm and help with the control. As time passed by, the plane turbulence got worsened every single minute. Not only the passengers but even the flight attendants were also panicked. Thiruvananthapuram permitted them to land on runway 16, hoping they would make it safely. When the Vikrant tried to land the plane, the wheels kept slipping and he had to fly the plane again. Amid the flight, Vikrant hallucinated about her wife and daughter celebrating his daughter's birthday with the other passengers in the cabin. He regained his sense when Tanya shook his body. Vikrant then told Thiruvananthapuram ATC that they would attempt another landing, but despite the ATC's recommendation to land on runway 16, Vikrant refused and decided to land on runway 34. The ATC thought that the Vikrant had lost his senses because the wind direction on runway 34 was not safe for landing. They estimated that the plane's tail would be torn off. Everyone including Tanya thought that they wouldn't survive that. Vikrant sent a mayday signal to signal danger. The plane had almost run out of fuel and they had to land no matter what. Vikrant reminded the passenger to prepare for impact upon landing. He closed his eyes and remained calm. He focused and concentrated to land the plane as smoothly as possible. The plane has almost reached the end of the runway when they finally stopped. Vikrant had managed to land the plane safely during such extreme weather. The airport officials started evacuating the passengers while Vikrant was still deep in thought about what he had been through. Vikrant's wife on the other side had been waiting for her husband's news. She decided to call Yusuf, his husband's friend who was also the chairman of the Pilot Association, to seek information about the Vikrant. As a result of the heroic and extreme landing, Vikrant and Tanya had to undergo an investigation by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation. Before the investigators arrived, The representative from Skyline Airways approached Vikrant and told him not to cause a ruckus during the investigations to avoid any problems for the company. Vikrant and Tania's investigations were carried out in different places. They were asked about the Mayday signal they set before the landing. Long story short, the investigations were over. Vikrant said to the officer that someone had just saved 150 lives shouldn't be treated like that. The officer then said that he saved 149 lives, not 150. One of his passengers, an old woman, had a heart attack during the flight and died while she was on her way to the hospital. The result of the investigations was then sent to Narayan Vedant, the head of the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau. Vikrant was now shrouded in guilt after hearing that one of his passengers died on his flight. Yusuf come and told him that it was not his fault that the lady died. Vikrant denied that as a pilot he was a courier who had the responsibility to take care of his passengers and delivered them safely to their destination. Not long after, Vikrant got a phone call from the daughter of the deceased passenger. On that call, she told Vikrant that he was nothing but a murderer. Vikrant got more engulfed by the guilt he couldn't even look the media in the eyes. Narayan and his team, on the other hand, were busy carrying out their investigation. They listened to the plane's black box recording and gathered some suspicious things to collect any evidence about the accident. On his daughter's birthday, Vikrant received a letter for investigations from the AAB that would be conducted the following week. Narayan called him to prepare for the investigation. Vikrant calmly replied that he had nothing to prepare for. He said that only someone who did something that had to prepare for such a thing. On the other hand, the director of Skyline Airways was happy as his company's stock price had been increasing since Vikrant's heroic landing incident. When he heard that Narayan himself would investigate Vikrant's case, his facial expression suddenly changed. He then held a meeting to anticipate any questions asked by Narayan. Meanwhile, Narayan had done some in-depth and detailed investigation to find solid evidence to accuse Vikrant. Narayan summoned the ATC staff on duty on that night of the incident to his office. He had been asking for the communication record from the Skyline 777 to the ATC for 4 days and still had no answers since then. The Kochi and ATC staff explained that the report would be rewritten every 12 hours. From their conversation, Narayan didn't seem to seek for the report about the recording but to hear the recording itself. The staff replied that handing over the report would just be fine since the report was rewritten every 12 hours to ensure there were no errors in it. On the night, Skyline Airways director held a meeting with the representatives of Queen's Airlines Skyline. Skyline Airways wanted to ask for help from Queen's Airlines, which had a close relationship with the Minister of Aviation, to get rid of Narayan from Vikrant's investigation. Unfortunately, Queen's Airlines agreed to help on one condition. They demanded 65% shares from their company merger instead of 50% from the initial contract. Skyline broke down the agreement. The Skyline Airways director said that they would manage to get through this. The debate about the death in the Skyline 777 flight had been widely discussed on TV news. Some blamed the pilot for the incident while others said that it was the best option for the pilot in that situation. Moreover, Vikrant was a professional pilot and he should know what he was doing. The first trial of Vikrant and Tania was finally carried out. Narayan judged that Vikrant was leading the flight in exhaustion after undergoing non-stop flights for the whole week. Narayan explained that plane crashes often occurred because of feeling homesick for family. The anxiety and desire to go home quickly could make the pilot act negligently. Vikrant proved that he was not negligent by telling the contents of the flight details document that he can memorize even though he only skimmed it for a short time. The accusations given to him were unreasonable. Then Narayan showed the ball of aspirin which could only be accessed by the cabin crew or pilots. Narayan suspected that the Vikrant took the drug and to prove it he used a lie detector machine. Long story short, Vikrant was able to pass a series of questions from Narayan without problems. The trial was finally postponed and will be continued the next day. Skyline Company conducts a meeting with the Vikrant. They asked him to remain silent during the trial process instead of answering questions that might harm the reputation of the company. Vikrant refused. He was then threatened to be blacklisted from the whole company flight if he put Skyline Airways in danger. They also warned Tanya the same thing. The second trial began. Narayan started asking Tanya a series of questions. Tanya explained that Vikrant was a dedicated pilot. The conversation they had during the flight was just a normal conversation. Narayan's questions continued to intimidate Tanya, troubling her to choose her words to explain what she meant until Tanya answered that before flying Vikrant's eyes looked red and he slept for 20 minutes after the plane took off. In addition, there was also a bit of debate between the pilot and the co-pilot when determining the alternative landing destination. Then Narayan presented Anjali, a woman whom Vikrant met at a club in Dubai. Anjali was asked a question whether she was drinking alcohol with Vikrant and his other friends until the morning in a club. Vikrant did not deny what Anjali said, but he explained that he still took a break for 12 hours while the pilot's drinking ban as stated in the flight rules was 12 hours before the flight. The time he finished his party in the club until the plane took off was around 15 hours. That could only be meant that he did not violate the rules. After that, Narayan asked about Vikrant's decision to land in Thiruvananthapuram instead of Bengaluru despite the storm warning Thiruvananthapuram ATC had notified. Vikrant replied that the pilot only made decisions based on information from ATC, but the coach in ATC did not provide information about the storm. Narayan then explained the mistakes that Vikrant made during the flight, including uncertain decisions during the flight, the extra time they took flying above Kochi for 33 minutes and filling up the fuel below maximum capacity. Vikrant then answered that the pilot didn't make rules. They just carried it out, and what he did must have been following the standard operation. There were no pilots that wanted their passengers in danger during their flights. Narayan went back to convey his question to Tanya. Tanya accidentally told the surprising fact that Vikrant made a plane landing with his eyes closed. Narayan used Tanya's statement as proof that the Vikrant was drunk during the flight. Next, Narayan moved to the issue of runway choosing. He asked about Vikrant's decision by choosing runway number 34 instead of runway number 16, which had been considered risky by the Thiruvananthapuram ATC. Just a moment after, the trial was postponed once again without any defense from Vikrant. When Vikrant got home, his wife took him to the house of the daughter of the deceased passenger to apologize for what happened to her mother. The next day, the third trial was held. The judge began to read their decision. Before the verdict was read, Vikrant said that he had the topography memory of runway number 34. He didn't choose runway 34 randomly, and he closed his eyes to memorize the map of the runway in his mind because he remembered the runway in detail after doing a lot of landing there. Narayan argued that Vikrant's statement was nonsense from someone who didn't want to admit his mistake. Vikrant then asked the judge to do a reenactment of the flight in the flight simulation machine to prove that he could land the plane in the same situation as that day with his eyes closed. The judge agreed to Vikrant's request. Narayan would sit on the co-pilot's seat to see the Vikrant in action. Vikrant's extraordinary concentration in controlling the plane made Narayan amazed by his skill. The judge's decision was finally read. Cochin's ATC staff who was negligent in providing information for the Skyline 777 was dismissed from his position, while Tanya and Vikrant got pilot license suspension for 3 months, but an investigation would be carried out against the Skyline Airways company. After the trial was dismissed, the Vikrant approached Narayan and asked why he only got pilot license suspension for 3 months. Narayan replied that he didn't want to eliminate such talented pilots in his country. Seeing Vikrant flying a plane in the simulator made him believe in Vikrant. For 40 years of his career he had never seen a pilot do that. 3 months later Vikrant was back off flight. One of the flight attendants on Skyline 777 came to him and said that she was the one who consumed the Dispiron. She wanted to admit her mistake earlier, but she was afraid that her confession would make her lose her job. Vikrant was not angry. He knew why the flight attendant chose to do that. That was all of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Click the like button and subscribe to watch more videos like this. And don't forget to turn on notifications. Thanks for watching.